And that, to me, is the name of the game.
Well, you are really good at explaining everything that's happening and are really good at like laying it out in a very easy to understand pattern, like where it first was introduced into the education system, the blind spots that people have towards how Marxism works, even especially like during the time of the 1960s and the 70s when a lot of this stuff was gaining momentum in the United States because of the anti-war movement. They were completely ignoring what happened in the gulags. They're completely ignoring what happened in Cuba. They had this very rosy perception of communism, which always leads to military dictatorship. Always. There's no evidence of it ever not leading to that. It's like the idea of like, you know, I know everybody dies of rabies, but I don't think I'm going to die of rabies.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just going to get bit by fucking rabies kills everybody.
Yeah.
It's like one lady who didn't die of rabies because of a very novel treatment where they have to put her into a medically induced coma. Because rabies is such an old disease and it's such an aggressive disease that your immune system can fight it off, but it can't keep up with it. And eventually the rabies wins, and it always wins. So by putting her in a medically induced coma, I don't know what about the biological process of it, but it somehow or another shorted out her body to the point where it had the resources to effectively battle the rabies because she was just completely immobile and in a medically induced coma. So she actually was one of the very few people ever in history to survive rabies.
Oh, well, the analogy is perfect. The analogy is perfect. I mean,
like we can do it.
Marxism will put your whole society, at best, in a medically induced coma. And at worst, you get starvation, gulags, mass suppression, and so...
Well, it kills the society is what the point is. The point is the best case scenario is that you somehow, through a medically induced coma, fucking survive it.
Yeah.
There's no improvement.
No.
You're probably wrecked for the rest of your life. I mean, it's probably such a horrific disease that everything's compromised after that.
When I was in my 20s, I traveled through a lot of the former Soviet Union socialist republics, so Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, and Mongolia and other countries that had been ruled by the Soviets. And what happened, and I think there is, of course, with caveats in a much lighter way here, is you have an ideology that seeks conquest, it generates failure, and then it seeks more conquest. And so when you travel through those countries, it is the most depressing, gray, dismal, haunted kind of places you can be. It's these Soviet block housing. It has enormous rates of alcoholism. You see people strewn on the road, freezing to death in the winters. There's no economic productivity. There's no culture. The Soviets had evaporated their religions and all of their old customs. And so you have human beings that have been totally extracted from any of their cultural traditions. They've been totally annihilated as far as their economic possibilities, but you still have 3, 4, 5 million people, and it's what happens when your society is devoured by ideology. And so the ideology that we're seeing in American institutions is, of course, different. We're blessed with this country to have a much more robust system and history, but it's functionally the same. And to your point, in the late 80s or late 60s and early 70s. You had true Marxist-Leninist radicals, the Black Panther Party, the Communist Party USA, the Weather Underground. And if you look at their literature, their propaganda materials from that time, and you compare it to what's happening in, let's say, Buffalo Public Schools, their BLM curriculum. I actually did this. I looked at the Black Panther Party pamphlets they were selling to foment revolution and the Buffalo Public Schools curriculum. It's like pretty close. The ideas are the same. Of course, they're softened. They use the nice language about DEI or what have you. But, we should take ideas seriously. And bad ideas have bad consequences for societies.
And it's a small amount of people that are having an enormous influence on indoctrinating kids. And that's why you're seeing kids today that grow up with this version of the society and reality that we live in that so doesn't jive with people that are older than them, who didn't grow up in that system, who are like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not that bad. Like, the things you're saying are insane. You're freaking out over almost nothing and not paying attention to the important things. There's important things going on in this world, but it's not microaggressions.
Yeah.
It's not that Google shouldn't show images of white men when you pump in the AI and ask who the founding fathers are. They wouldn't even. Did you see what they did with Nazis?
Did they make multiracial Nazis?
Multiracial Nazis. They had an Asian woman Nazi.
It's inclusive. Yeah, I guess.
It's fucking bananas. It's bananas. It's literally like a movie. It's a Mike Judge movie. It's Idiocracy.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing where logic has just been blown by the wayside because the very people that are in charge of disseminating education and challenging young minds have completely abandoned that task and are now wholesale focused on promoting this ideology that must be adhered to. And none of these people exist that are teaching these things. None of these people exist in the world that we're currently existing in, which is the outside of university world. These people exist in this bizarre world where they get indoctrinated and educated, and then they indoctrinate more and educate more, and they stay in this system. And they're not out there in the world. They're just not.
But that
they
raises
don't
the
speak
question.
for us.
But they don't speak for us. They don't agree with us, and yet they're ruling the institutions that are educating our children, that are forming the values, that are creating the very vocabulary that we use. You know, it used to be that you'd have a quirky, tweeted out, Marxist professor who would be smoking a pipe in an Ivy League school, and you could say, well, that's fine. The kids go to Princeton and they get 2 years with the Marxist whack job, and then they get out in the real world. The problem is that ideology that was confined to a relatively small part of society, where it was tolerated because it added some diversity of experience or ideas, has now extended to institutions that really do matter. And so the question is, if you're sending your kids to school, the majority of the parents don't like what's being taught, and it's being taught anyway, what kind of system do we live in? Is that democratic governance? Is that the representation of the people? If we're paying for it, we're sending our kids through it, but we don't have a stake in and the control of the values that are being formed in those institutions. I think it's a very serious question. It's not trivial to say we're kind of beyond some of those limits and some of those constraints that make a democratic form of government meaningful. When the bureaucracy rules and it's pushing ideology against the will of the majority of the people, we're in a kind of scary position in our country.